So thank you everyone for joining us today. We have a great panel, great presentation for you, navigating carbon emission caps. Let me just start out by saying right away that this presentation will be recorded. We'll have, if you have to step out or you miss something, we'll be able to watch the recording later, as well as the slide deck. So for the agenda today, we're going to do some brief introductions, and then we'll have our expert panelists, GES. They'll come up and talk about carbon emission caps regarding Local Law 97. We'll hear from New York City Accelerator, and we'll talk about steam system balancing, review some case studies, and open it up for Q&A. If you have any questions, please feel free, type them in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and we will get to all of them at the end of the session. So briefly about building efficiency services first. We help high-rise and multifamily commercial buildings comply with Local Law 97. We retrofit steam systems. We also work with hydronic and electrification. And of course, Local Law 97 compliance and incentives. We help capture available energy incentives. We upgraded over 300 buildings in New York City, serviced over 70,000 radiators, and saved New York City over 3 million therms. We're participating contractors with the utility companies and a partner with New York City Accelerator. With us today also, we have Dylan and Stephen from GES, Greenwich Energy Solutions. They've been in business now for about 15 years, and they're a leading provider of energy solutions and credentialed experience in energy management and efficiency. We've done a number of jobs together with GES. They're phenomenal people, and you'll hear their presentation shortly. And of course, joining us again is Marissa from New York City Accelerator. Marissa is a fantastic account manager. If somehow you are not yet familiar with New York City Accelerator or the service they provide, reach out to Marissa, tremendous resource navigating Local Law 97. So I want to now go ahead and open it up for GES. Stephen, Dylan, please take it away.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Stephen Hughes. I'm with Greenwich Energy. And let's see, first of all, I want to introduce our company. So Greenwich Energy Solutions, we are a technically oriented energy consulting company. As you've heard already, and this is up on the screen, we've been around in New York City for about 15 years. And we do everything energy related that has to do with buildings. So we'll do compliance, benchmarking, energy audits, retro commissioning. We'll also do technology assessments, project management. We do, and then we also do general consulting. So if we have owners and property managers who are confused by all of the laws that are coming into place, or have questions about how to comply, or they want to develop a strategy, we work with them to understand what's going on in their building, how they can be doing better, and then help to guide them through the process of actually executing those goals. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so we were asked to do an overview of Article 320, particularly as it pertains to buildings and building managers. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard this already, but Local Law 97 is the big law that came out of the Climate Mobilization Act, and it requires buildings over 25,000 square feet to do annual reporting of greenhouse gas emissions. And as you may know, these reportings are also compared to the annual limits that are determined by the Department of Buildings, and originally through the Department of Buildings, and then again through various rules the Department of Buildings put out. And it ratchets down the limits that are in place every 5 years. Some people think that we only have to report once every 5 years. Some people think that the limits maybe stay the same throughout the entire thing. It is reporting every year, and every 5 years the limits reduce, and the penalties for exceeding the allotted amount of emissions are $268 per metric ton. And this is a pretty serious law. Previously, with other laws that came particularly out of the Green and Greater Buildings Plan, there were penalties, but they were harsh, but not not the end of the world, I would say, even though they're can be painful. With local law 97, these penalties for, first of all, for exceeding your limits can range from anything from a very small dollar amount up into, we've seen some projections for some clients up in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. On top of that, there are pretty severe penalties for non-compliance. So for not submitting your report, it is 50 cents per square foot for each month that the report is not submitted. So if you take, for example, 100,000 square foot building and you report 6 months late, that's $50,000 a month or $300,000 in fines. So we're encouraging all of our clients to take this very seriously and to take the time with us to educate, basically get some education on this, understand what you're actually looking at, get some projections so you know when you will be looking at fines, and take appropriate steps to mitigate them ahead of time. All right, can we go to the next slide, please? So many of you are familiar with this, but this is the Building Energy Exchange Local Law 97 calculator. It's created by AKF, and it is a very useful tool. This pulls the information from the public disclosure of the benchmarking data. And you can see here, this is exactly what we were talking about here, where every 5 years, the limits ratchet down. The major one is going to be the one that happens from 2029 to 2030. That's the biggest drop, as the original, basically the first year of compliance, which is 2024, calendar year 2024 through 2029, is really only intended to target the worst offenders in the city. Basically send a message to the buildings that have not been addressing their efficiency issues and that have basically just been major wasters, and really bring those ones in line. This is an example of a more typical building that you might expect to see, where we don't have any fines for the first 5 years, even though we do have to report every year. And then starting in 2030, we start seeing fines, and then as we would go into 2035, 2040, in a do-nothing scenario, this building would be incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines annually. One other thing I do want to point out here, you will see, and actually we'll talk about this on the next slide, but if you see the difference between the green area there, oh, fine, this works. Okay, so part of the questions that people often have is, how does this all work, right? What are the mechanics of this? And this is something that we want everyone to firmly understand. This is representative of the 2024 carbon intensity factors. And what's happening here is we're looking at, for each unit of energy, and in this case, we're looking at kBTUs. This is all normalized. So this is electricity in kBTUs, fuel oil, natural gas, district steam. But we convert those all into kBTUs. For each source of energy, we have a certain emissions factor. What that means is that basically we're calculating that, for each kBTU of gas, you're basically exposing the environment to 0.05311 kilograms of CO2 equivalent. District steam has another factor, because district steam is produced by natural gas. Fuel oil is pretty self-explanatory, and electricity, at least at the moment in New York City, is also not exclusively, but almost exclusively produced by natural gas. An important thing to note is that Local Law 97 does have written into it that the emissions factor for electricity in particular will reduce by half in 2030. So actually, can we just cut back to the previous slide for just a second? Nope. There we go. Thank you. You'll notice if we're looking at the block area at the bottom of the graph there, you'll notice there's a difference, even in a do-nothing scenario, between the 2024 emissions and the 2030 emissions. And that is basically taking into account the fact that the electricity emissions as calculated per local law 97 are cut in half there. So that's basically the sum of all of the energy sources here. And if we take out half of the electricity, it looks like maybe a quarter of their total energy is electricity. Then that takes out maybe 12.5% of their emissions as a result. Essentially what we're saying is that electricity is getting cleaner, and so that's the incentive that the Department of Buildings in the city is hoping will spur folks towards electrification. We have seen plans in the future for further cutting that, but I believe that is contingent on monitoring actual progress. We don't know what's going to be happening with the grid, but we hope that we know some things that are happening with the grid. New York State has a lot of projects in the works for offshore wind, for increased solar, as well as transmission lines bringing hydroelectric down into the New York City region. We're also contending with shutting down of Indian Point and things like that, which, despite being nuclear, was a major non-carbon emitting source of energy. Okay, and let's see. Yeah, okay, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this is a very important concept. Some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not be. The way that we determine whether or not a building has to comply with local law 97 is from the covered buildings list. Covered buildings list is published by the Department of Buildings, and it uses as its key metric for determining inclusion gross square feet or gross square footage, which, as you can see from the definition here, is what is provided by the Department of Finance. Many people who've been working with the Department of Buildings to accomplish things like benchmarking and local law 87 energy audits and retro commissioning have been essentially using the gross square footage number from the Department of Finance in order to benchmark their buildings and comply with other things. What we have been told time and time again is that the gross square footage number from the Department of Finance is not particularly reliable. We don't know in many cases where it has come from. We suspect that it is from certificates of occupancy or offering plans or other things, but we've been told that it has usable square footage or alternately all of the above grade square footage. And when buildings are using the gross square footage number for their calculations for local law 97, they're really selling themselves short. Because if you look at gross floor area, which is the definition used for local laws 84, 87, 97, and many others, it includes a lot of spaces that are not, that are basically would not be included in the gross square footage area from the Department of Finance. And why is this important? Because each area in your building, basically, your limit is determined by your square footage and the categorization of the space. So if you have 100,000 square feet, depending on what your building type is, that's going to give you a certain allowable emissions per square foot. And so if you have more square footage, you have a little bit more headroom. You have a little bit more space to work with in terms of what your allowable emissions are. Of course, having been working with these buildings for the past 15 years, a lot of our buildings are at least 60, if not 100 years old. When we ask, do you have plans for your buildings? We mostly get laughs and I wish as a response. So we've taken that and we've actually done something I think pretty unique. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so the question that we've been having is, how do we determine gross square footage, gross floor area in New York City buildings where there's always stuff going on and there's, there's sometimes inside it's sort of a labyrinthine layout, and in many cases, a lot of our buildings are residential buildings, so we can't necessarily, it can be somewhat intrusive to get accurate measurements for them. What we've been doing is we've been working with a collection of partners, and we've been doing exterior laser scans. So you can see on the left-hand side, that is one of our buildings that we did, where most of this was done from the ground level. So it was extremely unintrusive. We only needed to get into the building to get the roof measurements. But we were able to use basically laser measurements to get millimeter accurate representations of the building. And this building in particular had about a 7.5% bump in their square footage as a result from the Department of Finance record. And obviously the customer is very happy to hear that they have a little bit more space to work with. That will basically give them, I think it will, at least for the initial from the 2030 to 2035 period, should give them some basically reduced fines in a do nothing scenario. And then it means that they have a little bit less work to do to essentially bring themselves below that threshold. This can also be done via drones. We've been working with a couple companies on that. Obviously, logistics for this are significantly different. With a laser scan from a tripod, we really just need to get our folks on the ground and take the measurements. For a drone, you need to have permits from the NYPD, from the FAA, as well as significantly more insurance. But it is a viable method, and one of the advantages of doing the drone scans is that you can also get a jump start on your local law 11 compliance by having. Basically, we get high resolution imagery of the building, and that allows us to inspect for issues with the masonry, cracks, and mortar rot, and anything like that going on. So one of the other things is it's important to consider that this is really this first year of compliance is really the time to do this, because then you will have a easily defensible square footage number, as well as the data to back it up. We have these nice plans that we've developed for each floor. Obviously, we're just showing two here, but the Department of Buildings, while they haven't required putting plans in for the or sketches even for the square footage for the first round, we do expect them to be changing that. And they have indicated that they will reserve the right to audit the square footage information if basically if they think there's a reason to. So this is something that, it's with the laser scanning technology, it is significantly more economical that we've found. It's on less than 10 cents a square foot, which I think is quite reasonable. And again, millimeter accuracy, it's basically as defensible as you can get. And it really will help. So one of the things we are looking at is, as we are developing and working through basically these 3D models, helping this for building energy modeling. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with energy modeling, but a lot of it is command line based. It's not very intuitive, and it spits out calculations and numbers, and it's really sort of not a human friendly interface. Excuse me. This is one of the spaces where we think is going to be really advantageous to folks, because then what we'd like to do is start tagging radiators and noticing and basically correlating that to temperature readings and things like that, so that we can do continuous monitoring and continuous commissioning of these buildings as we work through them. So gross floor area, this is how we are doing it. We do think that there are some advantages to, we think there's some significant advantages to this. We also, an important thing to note is that for each of these buildings, you also need to classify these spaces properly. So with this one, this building happens to be a fully multifamily building, so it's pretty easy. Thank you very much. I was just about to ask. Do you measure the other spaces that are required for? Yes. Okay. So yes. Thank you, Valerie. you basically just asked the next question where we're going to be looking at. So local law 97 is not benchmarking. And I think it's important to note the very big differences between this. Energy benchmarking, which most of you are familiar with, you've been doing it for the past 13 years, I believe it is, has some interior space breakouts, but there's been a lot going on with that's caused a lot of issues and confusion and things like that. The EPA's portfolio manager tool requires certain spaces to be rolled up into the main space type, depending on their size and other things like that. Local Law 97, as far as we understand from the Department of Buildings, requires each space that is a separate entity to be called out and to be basically noted and have where we have our measurements for the space as well as what space it is. So for example, before, if you had multiple retail spaces, they could all be combined into one retail space for benchmarking purposes, and that was fine. Local Law 97, each one of those spaces needs to be broken out. Each commercial unit needs to be broken out separately by square area. Interior spaces, so this is an important component, which is new for Local Law 97, e.g. fitness rooms or anything like that can be broken out, even if they are for the exclusive route use of, in this case, we're talking about residents, but for example, if you have an office space that has a small restaurant, those things can be broken out as well. Why does this matter? Because, for example, if we take the case of fitness rooms, the allowance for emissions per square foot for fitness rooms is about 50% higher than it is for multifamily spaces. So if you have, especially if you have a large fitness room for your building, that space can be broken out. Also, this is less relevant here, probably something that your customers will need, your building will need to determine. Is it for years 1 and 2 of compliance, DOB occupancy types can be used in lieu of Energy Star portfolio managers categories. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, this is, I think, is addressing more of your question there, Valerie. So this year we did quite a lot of Local Law 88 assessments, and Local Law 88 in many cases requires that we have lighting power density. And looking at the hundreds of buildings that we work with, we looked at and knowing that they have quite irregular shapes inside the buildings, we thought that even a laser measure would not quite be enough to get us the information that we have. The information we need for lighting power density, watts per square foot. So what we did was we essentially used, this is not laser scanning, we actually use infrared scanning for this, and essentially created floor plans of the common areas for these buildings that allow us to basically have a floor plan immediately available to us that is, again, defensible and accurate. And so you can see here that we have in the very bottom left there, we've got almost 1,800 square feet of gym. And then you can see in the top image all the way to the left, you can see it's only about 331 square feet of gym. But these are part of the areas that we are, and then obviously we had to do the commercial tenants separately for Local Law 88 compliance. But one of the advantages that we had by basically taking this, by working with Local Law 88, was that we found that if we do this right the first time, that we can then make sure that all of our clients are ready to go for Local Law 97 when it comes. So, we think that this delivered a lot of value for our customers, and it also allows us to do something very special, which is on our next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay, great. Okay, so while we're doing this infrared scanning, we basically through the infrared scan, we also created a Matterport tours of these spaces. And I don't know, Ari, are we able to click the link here that I have in this page to be able to? It's actually towards the image in the middle. I think you have to do control.
I think these links work on this slide.
There's no link to words. Okay. Essentially, if you look at at this image here, each one of those circles is a tag for each of the pieces of equipment. So we have three-way suction valves. We have the motors there. We have each of the VFDs and their disconnects. And this is basically a 3D tour that allows owners and operators as well as trainees to basically run through the mechanical rooms and have at their disposal manuals, spec sheets, data sheets, flow diagrams, essentially all of the tools that building owners and operators need to have, and especially if they have turnover of their key personnel. We have all of these resources in a searchable database that will bring you exactly to the right space. It has all the equipment. If something's breaking, you can have the information to know exactly what you need to replace it, and essentially have at your fingertips tools that everyone in the building should have readily available. We often see sometimes we see instructions written on the wall or on a piece of equipment, or notes about what serves what, or more often than not, it's somebody who just knows how everything works. And then if that person is on vacation or something else, it's kind of a disaster. So what we're looking for is basically creating tools to help owners and managers to tighten up their operations and reduce any time where something isn't working right that could be negatively impacting their energy usage. All right, can we go run to the next slide, please? And then this. So I'm glad we have at least one 3D. So this is actually a model that we created of the mechanical room floor of a very large building, a large customer of ours. But you can see essentially this is a demonstration showing that this is all done with lasers. It's laser accurate layout of the entire space. So we can do rigging plans. We can have measurements from. We can have our PEs can do measurements from anywhere to anywhere in this. Essentially having what is a digital twin that allows us to, first of all, assess things remotely, as well as basically determine, spend some time working in the space without needing to have access to the space directly, which is really, really helpful for us. I mean, we have our team members are all over the city, and sometimes you do need to be on site, but for a lot of initial work, initial looks, or for example, customers call up and say, hey, I don't know what's going on in this building. Can you help me out? And I've been to 30 buildings that week. I can at least pull up something and have a look and see what I should be on, what should be there, and what could possibly be going wrong. So this is one of the services that we offer. We think it's going to be quite helpful. And then I'd like to close with one last one, which actually is not a service of ours, but one of our partners. This is Logical Buildings. And some of you may know them from doing, demand response. So, from demand response, which essentially is for reducing energy consumption during times of peak demand. They are rolling out to all of our customers as well as many others the carbon tracking, which allows real-time carbon emission trackings, as well as a special algorithm, which I think is quite impressive. That allows for tracking based on your carbon caps. So obviously the largest source of energy use in buildings is going to be your heating, which very inconveniently is concentrated both at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. So if you end up with, basically blowing your budget in the beginning of the year because we have a cold snap, you have a very hard time quantifying what your headroom is for the remainder of the year. And so through SmartKit AI, which is also their platform for demand response, we are integrating with them all of our tools to create essentially a suite that will track interval data for the meters, so that your resident managers or your building engineers or whoever is operating at the building will get alerts that they are on track to exceed their carbon cap, and they can also just check into it if ever they want. My experience is that people mostly respond to alerts. They don't tend to check in on these things themselves. But it's a very, very powerful tool, and that in concert with the other tools that we're putting together, I think are quite useful to folks to be able to manage carbon emissions going forward.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Stephen. Great presentation. Side note that we've actually done a presentation with Logical Buildings. They're phenomenal people. Very, very cool technology there as well. So we're going to go now and slide over to Local Law 97. I want to call on Marissa to please talk to us. Go ahead, Marissa.
Yeah, thanks, Ari. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, firstly, our program, the New York City Accelerator. If you haven't heard of us before, we are a completely free advisory service through the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice to provide consulting on energy efficiency projects. We work with any building that is over 5,000 square feet located in New York City. So not just Local Law 97 help, of course, with any energy efficiency projects, reach out to us and we can guide you through the process. How it works, you reach out to us and you get connected with a dedicated account manager and then receive objective advice customized to your needs. And what's the catch and cost? There's absolutely no catch or cost or sign up or commitment. You can reach out to ask us a question or for project management all the way through your project. We're just here to help you and to be a resource. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit further in depth about Local Law 97, specifically how it affects affordable housing, because it's very different for affordable housing under the law. So we already got a little bit of an intro to Local Law 97, specifically how buildings under Article 320 need to comply with the law. But there is affordable housing can be treated somewhat differently under Local Law 97, specifically under Article 321. It's also important to note that although this was passed in 2019, DOB released a first rule package in 2022, and then a second package of rules not so long ago. And there was another update that just came out last month, if I'm not mistaken. So definitely, if you looked at the law and you're looking for more updates, there will be links in this presentation for you to take a look at them, see how different new updates may affect your property, and just stay on top of things because there's always new information coming out. So yeah, perfect. So I will talk a little bit about which buildings may have a different pathway to compliance. Specifically under Article 321, of course, everyone defines affordable housing differently. So it's defined under the law under Article 321 as buildings with more than 35% rent regulated units, HDFC co-ops, buildings with one or more units with federal project-based funding. So that's like Section 8, Section 202, 811, and NYCHA Pact and RAD buildings. Now, if your building has at least one rent stabilized units, but less than that 35%, you actually have delayed compliance. So that means starting in 2026 is when you would need to start reporting your emission limits all the way through to 2050. And although you fall under Article 320, you do have that delayed compliance. Then there are Mitchell Llama rentals and co-ops that have no federal project-based funding, or buildings that have no rent regulating units, but at least one or more income restricted units. You have a longer delayed compliance period. You would comply under Article 320, but your first report would not, you would start complying in 2035 with your first report due in 2036. So definitely take note if you have any buildings that fall under any of these categories, it has to comply with Local Law 97 very differently. If you have any that fall under the 2026 or 2035 pathway, feel free to reach out and let me know. I can definitely help you along with what that looks like for your property, but I'm going to hyper focus on Article 321. So you can go to the next slide, please. So this is that same portion of the chart just blown up a little bit bigger. I already mentioned what buildings fall under Article 321. The compliance requirement is one of two things. You either need to comply with your 2030 emission limits by the end of this year, or implement all the applicable prescriptive energy conservation measures by the end of this year. There's also, it is a one-time compliance requirement. So there's a one-time report due May 1st of 2025. So May 1st of next year. And there are two penalties associated with Article 321. There's a failure to report penalty of $10,000 and a failure to comply penalty of $10,000. So that's also very different than the penalties under Article 320. It's also important to note that these can be recurring fines, although it is a one-time compliance requirement. So very important to make sure that you are reporting and have some sort of compliance, one of the pathways completed, so that way you can avoid these fines. And then there are some penalty mitigation opportunities if you need a little extra time to comply. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So here's your timeline at a glance. If you are, no matter what, emission limits begin for all buildings starting this year. If you are under the Article 321 compliance deadline, you have until the end of this year to complete one of the pathways. And then your one-time compliance report is due May 1st next year. If you have any of the delayed pathways, so the 2026, you would start, your emission limits start 2026, your first report being due May 1st of 2027. And then the 2035 pathway, if you fall under that pathway, your first compliance report, your emission limits begin 2035 and your first compliance report is due May 1st of 2036. So here it is at a glance. If you have any questions on this timeline, of course, just let us know. If you have buildings that fall under multiple timelines, that's what we're here to help you with, is to kind of navigate what your plan is moving forward. So here are the two pathways to compliance under Article 321. The first one is demonstrating that for this year, in 2024, your building is already under that 2030 emission limits. So you would use your Local Law 84 benchmarking data. You saw earlier the Building Energy Exchange Calculator. That's a really great way at a glance to see how your building is doing. And then by May of 2025, submitting a report to the DOB certified by a registered design professional that your building is under that 2030 limit. Or you would implement all the applicable prescriptive energy conservation measures, or the PECMs, by the end of this year. And you would submit a report by May 1st of 2025 showing that all of them have been completed, certified by a retro commissioning agent. And we can move to the next slide so I can show you what the 13 prescriptive measures are. If you are familiar with this list, amazing. If you're not, this is at a glance, high level, what the 13 prescriptive measures are. I won't go through every single one of them, of course, but some of them fall under general measures. So those are checking temperature set points, insulating all of your hot water pipes, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things I want to point out is upgrading common area lighting that aligns with the Local Law 88 requirement that is due by the end of this year. There are some that are particular to steam systems. So one pipe and two pipe steam systems will have to implement those. And then some other maintenance measures that you will need to make sure that those are being upkept in your building. I'll also note that all of the measures that have a blue check mark next to them are ones that can be incentivized through different utility programs. So there is some help out there to help incentivize us and pay for these measures. So if you are looking for that help, feel free, of course, again, reach out to us, get connected with an account manager, and we'll be able to let you know what incentives can be applied to your scope. I also think that a lot of buildings, of course, the prescriptive measures sounds like a really good opportunity. However, of course, there's that other pathway, the 2030 pathway. So why would you want to necessarily choose that pathway? Depending on what your building future plans are. So let's say, for example, if your building is already performing super close to the 2030 limit, or if you're planning a deep retrofit in your building, you're doing an oil to gas conversion, you're planning electrification, it might make sense for you to do the 2030 pathway over the prescriptive measure pathway. So your plan of action here is determine your building's performance in relation to those emission limits, creating a building energy efficiency plan, and choosing projects to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions to meet those limits. So now I will talk very briefly about the penalty mitigation opportunities that are available for buildings under Article 321. So I mentioned there's those two penalties, the $10,000 late penalty and the $10,000 noncompliance penalty. And we can move to the next slide, actually. And there are 3 penalty mitigation opportunities. So if you need a little bit more time to comply, you're not going to be done by the end of this year. There's 3 different things that you can possibly file under. So the first thing is if there's an unexpected or unforeseeable event. So if your building is damaged as a result, but including but not limited to a hurricane, severe flooding, or fire, you can absolutely get a little bit more time to comply and be able to mitigate those penalties. Or if you're doing an eligible energy conservation project. So these are buildings that received funding from a housing agency as of November 15th of 2019, demonstrating that they implemented an eligible energy conservation project. If you have if you need more information about that in particular, feel free to reach out to us and we can see if your project may be eligible to apply under this penalty mitigation opportunity. The last one is mediated resolution. And this is one that I think most buildings will be complying under if they're looking for extra time. So the mediated resolution offers buildings more time under Article 321, where you can then meet your 2030 limits by 2030 or implement the prescriptive measures by the end of December 31st of 2025. So you get a full year of extra time for the prescriptive measures, or you get until 2030 to meet those 2030 limits. So if you do need that extra time to comply, definitely, of course, reach out to us. I sound like a broken record at this point, but reach out to us and we'll give you more information on the mediated resolution in particular so that you know exactly what you need to submit next year to be able to get that extra time. One opportunity I would love to highlight is through Con Edison. They have a Local Law 97 limited offering for affordable housing that falls under Article 321. So if you're trying to get those prescriptive measures done, there is incentives out there, as I mentioned for you. Here's a list of measures that they are incentivizing through this program in particular. You already know your incentives up front, which is great. So you know before you even get your proposals back how much money you could be saving. So if that's something you're interested in and you want to definitely get that extra funding to be able to complete those prescriptive measures, you can reach out to me directly and I can take a look at your building, see how you may be able to take advantage of these incentives. And then lastly, just how we work with buildings in particular. Firstly, we help clarify those local law 97 requirements, and then we identify those greenhouse gas emissions and compare them to limits, and then determine what pathway is appropriate. Does it make sense to meet that 2030 limit, right? Meet the greenhouse gas emissions, or does it make sense to implement the prescriptive measures? Then we'll also help identify, applicable financing and incentive programs and assemble a team of service providers, and then provide project management support through project completion. So whatever help you need is what we're here for. But with that, I'll pass it back over to Ari to continue.
Thank you so much, Marissa. And I'm getting to run a little bit short on time, so I'm going to kind of speed it up a little bit. Marissa's fantastic. We do a lot of work together with her and Accelerator. Definitely reach out. We'll have contact information at the end. So very briefly, steam systems are still usually one of the best opportunities to bring down your carbon emission limits, balancing and running your steam system more efficiently. This was highlighted in a report, a paper by Urban Green Council. Number of issues, common issues, and the solutions. You have varying hot and cold apartments, tenant complaints, open windows during the winter. That's a big one. Energy literally going out the window. And a lot of the solutions to these are actually on that 13 prescriptive measures that Marissa just spoke about. And really, we take a comprehensive and holistic approach to balancing your steam system. Briefly, steam traps, TRVs, if you're familiar with a steam system, these are tools or parts of your radiator that will help it running more efficiently. Pipe insulation keeps heat from escaping during the distribution. Orifice plates is actually an important one. We've been getting these are generally for larger buildings, two-pipe steam system buildings. They replace the need for steam trap repair, which is, occurs every 3 to 5 years. Steam traps fail and ensures an even distribution of steam throughout the building. Master venting, also one of the measures, and it happens in the boiler room, usually in the common area of the building, to allow steam to pass through the system easily. BES offers a turnkey solution for Article 321. We do from site survey until the regulatory filing. We provide on the right, or I should say on the left, is kind of a screen capture of part of the report that we provide customers after a survey as part of also a proposal to implement any measures. We help clients, buildings with Local Law 97, both 320 and 321, as well as Local Law 88 and 84. And we'll have contact information at the end if you want to talk about your building. This is what we call a scorecard. We do also larger multi-building projects. For example, NYC Pact. This is we'll have this in a case study. I'll talk about it briefly, but we're completely paperless. We provide these kinds of reports to management. They can see in real time the progress throughout the building. We also have a very good success rate of getting access. We work with management and tenants to get access to every unit. A lot of times there are units that are just inaccessible for whatever reason, but we have a really high success rate with that as well. A couple of questions we asked a while ago to the DOB when the rules were first coming out. This is closer to the beginning of the year, but I think it's still relevant to ask. Are radiant barriers needed for one pipe steam? That's one of the 13 measures, and it wasn't, I would say, crystal clear on the requirement for one pipe steam. The good news is that as a general rule of thumb, if you are going into the radiator, that means if you're going to be doing TRVs, which is also a requirement for two pipe, then you need to do radiant barriers. For one pipe steam system, though, it's not explicitly required. Second thing, Marissa also mentioned the $10,000 penalty for either non-compliance or not filing. And our question was, is this a one-time or an annual? And basically, DOB says it reserves the discretion to issue recurring penalties. So best not to find yourself in that situation. Best to comply. Briefly, case studies. This is a Queens oil fuel building. One thing about oil field buildings, there's not a lot of incentives that are available. Usually they're distributed through Con Edison or national or national grid, but we helped this building realize a 15% reduction in operating expenses and save 3,100 gallons of oil. And this was the NYC Pact that I showed you a scorecard of before, 20 building project, almost 1,600 units. We did a full AMI comprehensive program there. Saved the money, the building, I should say, a lot of money on their retrofit, and they implemented the full 13 measures at that building for Article 321. I would like to finally open it up for Q&A. Really great presentations from our panelists, Stephen and Marissa. I'm going to leave the contact information over here, and let's open it up and for any questions in the audience. Thank you, everyone. We have Ellie from our team here. He's a senior project manager. Eli, if you don't mind, can you check the chat and see if we have any questions for our panelists?
Yes, thank you, Ari, and thank you everyone again for a wonderful presentation. So if anyone doesn't mind, you can just type in your questions in the chat box, but I had some that came in to myself personally. Question one is, if my building is far under the limits and not facing a penalty, should I still get a gross floor assessment?
That sounds like it's for you, Stephen.
Yeah, so I would say that yes, you should, because a couple things. One, we've found that Con Edison has a history of not reporting accurately. So we just had this question come up with a customer just very recently, where they had no fines projected at all for the past few years, especially since during the pandemic. We noticed there was a couple-year period where there were issues with the reporting, and then we found out that that building actually Con Edison was underreporting, and they are looking at fines. So that is and so if that's the case, we found out that they basically, they thought, oh, we're good until 2040, and then it looks like, oh no, they're not. They're in the same boat as most people, which is no fines until 2030, but then 2030 they become significant. The other component is that this law is intended to go on into perpetuity, and those 5-year reductions basically by 2050. I know that that's a very long way in the future, but the idea is that by then these buildings, you should be carbon neutral, and at any point along that line, you're likely to start incurring some fines. And if we establish the record now as to what your gross floor area is, it's an important tool that you will have going forward for the building basically forever. So we do encourage buildings, even if they're not projected to have any fines. Certainly, if they are projected to have fines, it definitely is very helpful. But obviously, if they are, even if they are not, it's an important component of the filing, and it will help you down the line. And it establishes a record that with the DOB of what your gross floor area is.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Eli?
Thank you, Stephen. Next question that I received are there any potential issues when installing orifice plates?
Oh, it's a great question. I'll take that one briefly. So with orifice plates projects, like I said, they do a lot for the building as far as the long-term maintenance, and eliminating the need for steam trap maintenance every 3 to 5 years. That involves the cost of actually replacing the steam traps, and then of course going through the process of getting access to all the units. The caveat is that over time, buildings have been maintained by different companies, different firms, and sometimes when you install an orifice plate project, you uncover some underlying issues with the distribution system. That means that the company that's helping you with an orifice plate project really should have experience in diagnosing underlying issues. General rule of thumb, I would say, let's say about 3 years and about 15 or so buildings that they've done under their belt. Every building tells its own story. It's a unique situation. So things can come up, but everything is correctable once underlying issues are exposed, and then post fixing any underlying issues, it really has a really good payback and long-term maintenance for the building. Thank you.
Thank you, Ari. Just a couple more questions that we have over here. Is there any risk for filing for an LL97 extension via mitigation? Is it better to comply by deadline if possible, or does it make a difference?
Marissa, that sounds like you.
Yeah, I can take that question. I don't think there are any associated risks with doing it. I do, however, definitely would say to make sure that you are looking in and submitting all the documents that you do need to include. Some of the things that you need to include is like an energy, like what your plan is going to be if you're doing it to comply under the 2030 pathway. Or for the prescriptive measures, you have to have what contractors are going to be doing the work and a timeline for when those will be completed. So I don't think there's any risk that I've seen written anywhere to get that extension. However, you do need to make sure that you are including all of the documents that you need to submit.
Thank you, Marissa. And then lastly, we have from Michael, is there a low interest source of financing for these energy use reduction projects?
Yeah, I think I think Marissa should really take this one, but I'll just pipe in for a second that we work with a number of green banks. NYSERDA has a green bank that offer creative financing solutions for these types of things. And of course, there are incentives as well that help reduce that cost. But if Marissa, maybe you can speak to that a little bit, please.
Yeah, for sure. I think the two things that you brought up are definitely really great options. Also, through the Accelerator program, we have a financing team that is super well versed on all the different things that you could do and could take advantage of to be able to finance these different projects. So I definitely would say to reach out to the Accelerator. And specifically, when you do reach out, you can let them know that you are looking for financing help. One of the things that they may ask for is, do you know the cost of the projects? Do you have any what the reserves look like, et cetera, et cetera. So just make sure that you have all that information as well. If you don't already, or you don't have like proposals just yet, we can help you, of course, connect with contractors and get those proposals to then see how much financing help you'll need.
Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Marissa. Yes, Valerie. Ari will be sending out the presentation and the slide deck, recording of this presentation, shortly hereafter. And then lastly, we have that just came in from Hanka. If a building is a garden style and erroneously listed on CBL, what is the cost to DOB for RDP to dispute the list, supplying supporting documents as requested per the law?
That was a mouthful, but Stephen, did you get all that?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that it's just, I don't believe there's a cost to the DOB because I think that the dispute is with the Department of Finance. Because the CBL is based on the Department of Finance numbers. So you have your RDP. So your costs with the RDP are the cost with the RDP. But I do not believe there is a cost to submitting a challenge to the Department of Finance to basically correct their number to then get you off of the list. And if anyone knows otherwise, please correct me.
Yeah, there shouldn't
Thank you.
be a cost
Sorry.
associated. Sorry to jump in. There is also an email in particular you can reach out to. If you want to send me a quick email, my email's up on the slide right now. I'll send you the information that you'll need and the person to reach out to at DOF to have this corrected.
Wow, super helpful. Thank you both, Marissa and Stephen. That's awesome. And definitely reach out to both of them. Great question from a great question. Thank you. We're just over the hour now, and just want to really thank again everyone for coming. Excellent presentations from our panelists. We'll be doing another presentation in about 2 weeks. Marissa will be joining us for that. We'll send out some emails about that as well. Thank you for spending part of your day with us. We look forward to seeing you again. Have a great day, everyone.